What's up everybody, Daniel Day back again with another video for DDay Gaming, and today I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about 5 things that I think the PlayStation Vita did really wrong that the Nintendo Switch seems to be doing just perfectly. So that's what we're going to do here today. If you're into that sort of thing, stick around and I will see you after the break. Okay, so for those of you that have been following my channel recently, you probably watched my video covering the fact that the Nintendo Switch may very well be the Wii U that I always wanted. And that video was the result of a random thought that occurred to me one night as I was driving home. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll see if I can work a little bit of YouTube magic and pop something up on the screen up here that you can click on to watch that and then come back and watch the rest of this one. But for those of you that have already seen that, this video is much in the same vein. I was talking to my brother earlier this week and we were talking about how excited I was for the Switch and how odd it was to me that Nintendo kept pointing out in their newer marketing materials that you could click in on the sticks on the Joy-Con. And somewhere in that conversation, the thought occurred to me that Nintendo may very well be aware of some of these things that I think put the final nail in the coffin for the Vita before the thing even launched, and trying to make sure with their marketing message that they point out that they are not kind of falling into the same pitfalls, right? So before we get any further into this, I suppose I should probably stop and say that I love my PlayStation Vita. Yes, it did not necessarily fulfill all of the promises that Sony made to me and everybody else as far as what that console was going to be and what it was going to evolve into. Certainly, it did not work out as well for Sony as they wanted it to. But I really do enjoy it. It has spent the last couple of years with me being basically a wonderful way to play PlayStation 1 classics that I could download, as well as a lot of PSP games on that gorgeous OLED displays. So I've enjoyed it quite a bit. But again, that is not to say that it is perfect. Now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into those 5 things that I feel the PlayStation Vita got really wrong that I think the Nintendo Switch is getting really right. Okay, so number 1, that is the name. PlayStation Vita, what does that even mean, right? It seems like just a random word that Sony really liked and they just decided to go ahead and go with it. When you look at their last portable offering, the PlayStation Portable, well, that tells you exactly what it is, or at least what they want you to think, the mindset they want you to have going into it. This is like your home console, which is the PlayStation, but it's portable. The name is very descriptive, right? And the PlayStation Vita doesn't describe anything about the console. I know it seems normal now because we've been saying it for several years, but it's just not a great name in my opinion, right? And so that's kind of a problem. Then you look at the Nintendo Switch. Now, I'll admit, the name had to grow on me a little bit, but I don't actually think that's because it was a bad name. I think it's just because we had spent so long calling the thing the Nintendo NX, which I had just assumed stood for Nintendo Cross, seeing as how X is commonly used to replace the word cross in Japan. We'd been saying it for so long that I think that just made it right. And so anything that wasn't that was going to sound odd, right? But, now that we know it's called the Nintendo Switch, it's grown on me, and I think that much like the PSP, it very much describes the gimmick or the main purpose of the system, the thing that it does. This is a home console that you can then lift out of the dock, and it switches to becoming a portable console. So I think for that reason, if nothing else, it's a good name. Now, of course, unfortunately, the word Switch in the English language also has some other connotations. Probably don't Google that because you might not be happy with what pops up on your screen. Or maybe you will. I don't know. Look, I'm not judging. Whatever makes you guys happy. But, in any event, I think that the Switch is a strong name, much like the PSP was a good name. Vita just didn't do it for me, right? And that brings me into thing number 2, and that is essentially the way that they marketed the thing. They really went out of their way, even more so than with the PSP, to try and convince you that this thing was a home console in terms of graphics quality and power that you could take with you. Now, obviously, that was impossible for the time, but they really wanted you to believe that, right? And just to further prove the point, they made sure that they launched that thing with an Uncharted game. And they said, yeah, no, I mean, technically it's not running at the same resolution as you would get on your PlayStation 3, but you know, the screen's smaller and all of that, and so it's going to seem the same resolution. This thing is you know, again, it's got less of a screen to fill, and so it can run at lower resolutions, but you're basically going to get the same experience on the go. And of course, that was not at all the case. The load times, the graphical fidelity, all of the weird little glitches here and there, just the horsepower of the system was nowhere near the PlayStation 3, its home console contemporary. But that's really what they wanted you to believe. That's something that they probably shouldn't have pushed quite as hard as they did, because ultimately the thing didn't live up to that promise, and it burnt a lot of gamers, right? Now you look at the Nintendo Switch, they're marketing it the same way. They're saying this is a home console that you can take with you, except in this particular case, that's exactly what it is, right? Now, mind you, the screen on that thing is 720p, and some games are going to be 1080p when you hook them up to the TV. And yeah, you've probably heard the same arguments tossed around about the fact that, yeah, the screen's 720p, but, you know, it's much smaller, and so, you know, that's going to basically make it seem the same as when it's up on the television. But the thing about that is games journalists telling you that. That is their impression of it. They're saying the screen is gorgeous and that they can't really tell a difference between the portable mode and the screen mode. Nintendo is not telling you that. You did not see that in a Nintendo press conference or in any of their marketing material, them just flat saying anything of the sort. That's just real world impressions, right? But this thing is, the brains of that thing are in the portable console. Yes, it's going to run at a higher resolution on some games when you plug it in to the dock, but at the end of the day, because it is the same console, Nintendo is basically selling you exactly what Sony promised, except in this case, they're actually giving it to you, right? So hopefully that is going to lead to a lot less disappointed gamers when they pick this thing up on Friday, right? The third thing on my list is the lack of 2 sets of shoulder buttons on the PlayStation Vita. Wow, that was so obnoxious. You know, it's crazy to me too, because Sony, again, was selling this thing as a home console equivalent that you could take on the go, and yet they didn't outfit it with all the buttons that were on their own home console controller. I mean, come on, guys, how hard is it to just put 2 sets of buttons up there? You're telling me that I'm going to play an Uncharted game that's going to be just like the home console experience on this portable little handheld, and I'm thinking to myself before it even came out, well, no, that's not right, because that Uncharted game requires 2 sets of buttons up here, and you're not giving those to me, right? And, you know, some games tried to kind of replicate that, with some with more success than others, with the touchpad on the back. But at the end of the day, it was just a workaround for just an odd decision that Sony made. So I'm very, very glad to see that the Nintendo Switch has got 2 sets of shoulder buttons like any normal modern controller. That was just crazy to me. I remember holding my PSP and thinking, you know, this thing would be perfect if they could just put 2 sets of shoulder buttons so I could play, you know, first-person shooters and games like that that required the extra button inputs. Surely the replacement for this someday will have that. And it didn't, right? Which is just crazy to me. So I think that, again, that might be why Nintendo's making sure that in all of their marketing, that we know that there's actually 2 buttons back there, because they're small and they're hard to see. And in that first kind of unveiling video that they showed off, you know, there was that part with the kid on the plane sliding the Joy-Cons off, and we were all, you know, putting it in slow motion trying to figure out where there are 2 discrete sets of buttons up there before all of the details were released. And I think that that's because we all knew how important that was, right? If you're gonna release something that's supposed to in some way, shape, or form equate to a home console, you gotta have all the buttons of a home console controller, right? And so I think Nintendo knew that, and so that's why they're going out of their way to make sure that we know that there's 2 sets of buttons up there so you can emulate that home console controller situation on this thing when you take it on the go. That you're not going to have any kind of button inputs that need to be remapped if you're playing on a Pro controller versus using the Joy-Cons snapped onto the side of this thing or the Joy-Cons in the grip, which is great. And that brings me nicely to thing number 4, speaking of inputs, and that is that the PlayStation Vita did not let you click in on the sticks. Once again, Sony, the makers of the world famous DualShock 3 controller at the time that this thing was being designed on the PlayStation 3, and the 6-axis that preceded it. And one thing that the DualShock offered was what they call the R3 and L3 buttons. Those are the sticks that you click in. It gives you 2 more inputs on the controller. And you know, some games really need those extra couple of inputs to cram everything they need to cram onto a controller, as opposed to, say, for instance, a keyboard on a PC game. And again, that is something that the Vita just didn't do. You've got these 2 sticks there. They seem much better than the PSP sticks because they're not these little discs that slide around. They seemed like more like normal PlayStation control sticks, and yet they didn't click in. So now you're up to 2 more inputs that Sony has robbed you of, right? You're down 4 inputs that a normal modern home console controller would have that just aren't on this thing, right? That's a problem. And so with that in mind, I suppose it's not that big of a shock. You know, I mentioned at the beginning of this that, you know, this whole conversation with my brother started over the whole, why does Nintendo keep pointing out that you can click the sticks on the Joy-Con in, you know, just over and over and over again, that those are clicky buttons. But yet again, that's something that the Vita didn't do. They're just making sure that you know that all of the features of, you know, say for instance, a Pro controller are in fact present on the Joy-Cons. You're not making sacrifices when you want to take this thing on the go versus when it's docked and plugged in to your television, at least in terms of controls. And then number 5, right? Last thing that made the list is the memory card situation. Of course, that's what it is, right? You know, for whatever reason, the PlayStation Vita, Sony required that it use these proprietary Sony memory cards, right? And why they did that is beyond me. Perhaps it was that SD cards at the time couldn't do the read-write speeds that they desperately needed for their games. I don't think that's true, though. Perhaps it was an anti-piracy measure, or perhaps it was just a cash grab, right? But whatever the reason, that was a real big problem for the Vita. That is something that to this day continues to be a problem. You know, long after third-party developers quit regularly releasing games for the Vita and Sony themselves quit making first-party games for it, the Vita still lives on as a wonderful way to play PlayStation 1 classics that you can download off of the store, as well as PSP games, right? It's great, and it's on a much nicer screen than the PSP had originally. But it's just funny to me that up front, that decision meant that for those of us that wanted to buy our games digitally as opposed to buying the game cart, we weren't really getting a discount downloading the game versus going and getting that card, and we had to put it on a very, very expensive memory card that we had to go buy after the fact. And so every single time you had to buy a bigger card because you were running out of room, you really, really felt the price gouging in your wallet, right? And then long after that stopped, you stopped having all of these new titles released for it. It became this great way to have a huge chunk of the PlayStation 1 and PSP library with you on the go. And I've really enjoyed my Vita for that. But again, you dread running out of space just because of how much those things cost. And at the time, everybody was calling for Sony to just use standard SD cards. Why didn't they just use standard SD cards? And lo and behold, look what the Switch is doing, right? They are using standard micro SD cards at this point. Now, we don't have all the details on, you know, what speed classes they support and all of that, but the important thing is that we know that they will support the newer micro SD XC cards that will eventually someday go all the way up to 2 terabytes. But at the end of the day, your cost per gigabyte on those is very, very low. You can pick up some cheap cards. Yeah, if you want to pick up the one with the highest storage tier, just like with hard drives or anything else like that, you're going to pay a decent chunk of change for that. But if you just want to pick up a 32 or 64 or 128 gig UHS-1, you know, a Speed Class 10 card, that's going to be very, very, very inexpensive, and you can get a decent chunk of games on that thing, right? It helps make up for the fact that it's only got 32 gigs of memory built into the console itself. So yet another win for Nintendo. Heck, it's almost like Nintendo took a look at all the things that they thought made the Vita fail and just went out of their way to avoid them in their marketing and their messaging. It would not shock me at all if that is exactly what happened. So yeah, it was just interesting to me that although the Switch is both a handheld and a home console, that the things that I always complained about being wrong with the Vita from the get-go, Nintendo has managed to avoid every single one of those. And so that's got me even more excited for it. You know, it's been several years since the Vita came out, but I still regularly have those conversations. So it was still fresh on my mind. And yeah, some of those decisions were just baffling. I'm very, very glad that Nintendo has gone the other direction with those things, and I'm sure that that is going to help the sales of that console quite a bit. Anyway, guys, this is probably as good a place as any to end this video. Like I said, it was just an interesting thought that occurred to me while I was talking to my brother, and it just makes me that much more hyped for the Nintendo Switch when it comes out later this week. That those are several things that other companies have gotten wrong in the past, and that Nintendo seems to have hit the nail on the head with this one in those respects. So do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comment section below. I always love talking to you guys. So just want to say thanks for watching if you've made it this far in the video. I really appreciate it. Special shout out to my subscribers. You guys are awesome. And if you're not currently a subscriber and you're watching this, maybe poke around, check out some of the other videos on my channel. And if you are into my particular brand of rambling, maybe consider subscribing. It's totally free for you, and it helps me out quite a bit, and it makes my day, which is awesome. If you would like to find me other places on the internet, you can follow me on Twitter at that DDay guy, and I also stream video games both here on YouTube and on Twitch. Same content in both places, so honestly, just whatever your preference platform-wise is for YouTube, you've already found the right place. If you don't want to lose me, click that subscribe button. And for Twitch, my username there is DDay on Twitch. So once again, everybody, just wanted to say thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next one.